Let's bring our business editor, Kate Moody, to the set. Welcome, Kate.
Hi,
Italy's debt is just one of many sticking points. But what else is causing problems for Brussels?
Well, European officials really see this as a step away from fiscal responsibility and towards different priorities. The proposed deficit is still officially within the EU-mandated 3% limit, but it's 3 times higher than what the previous government had outlined. It also calls for the retirement age to be lowered, while the trend across Europe is for longer working time. The most expensive of the controversial proposals is a campaign promise of the 5-star movement. It's a basic monthly income. The measure could cost up to 10 billion euros, and not all Italians are convinced that it's worth the trouble. Arno Gunke has more.
An ambitious and costly proposal to try and lift some 5 million Italians out of poverty. Luigi Di Maio, Deputy Prime Minister and Labour Minister, is pushing forward with a basic income for the poor, and a generous one, a maximum of 780 euros per month. Italy's government-run employment centers will be responsible for ensuring that the recipients of the wage meet the necessary criteria. To qualify, the individual must be actively looking for employment, complete 8 hours of community service per week, and must accept one of the first 3 proposed job offers. But many in Italy, from opposition politicians to job center employees, say the measure may be unrealistic.
We have met 2 or 3 times with Labour Minister Di Maio. He didn't explain anything about the basic income scheme or how it will be implemented in job centres.
According to critics, the current state of the job centers is precisely the problem. In Italy, only 3% of unemployed people find work through government-run employment centers, compared with 20% in France and in Germany. Among the reasons, outdated technology and underqualified staff. According to a government survey, 50% of the centers use inadequate computer systems, and only 20% of the center's staff holds a degree. The government says 1 billion euros will be allocated specifically to modernizing the centers. The citizen's wage could be introduced as early as March of 2019.
Now, that clash is one of many factors weighing on global markets this Tuesday. Stocks in Milan managed better than might have been expected, although the yield or return on Italian government bonds rose to session highs. Other major European indices dropped to their lowest levels in nearly 2 years. Germany's DAX down over 2% on the close. We're seeing a steep sell-off on Wall Street as well. The Nasdaq officially entering correction territory. That's a 10% drop from its recent highs. The Dow shed as much as 500 points earlier, although it has pared back slightly. Shares of Caterpillar were down 7%. That's dragged down trade across the board. It reported disappointing results, in part because of higher material costs linked to the trade tariffs. Oil prices, meanwhile, down over 4% as the international standoff with Saudi Arabia drags on. Now, the Future Investment Initiative Conference has opened in Riyadh with fewer attendees than expected. In addition to the IMF's Christine Lagarde and U.S. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, the bosses of French energy giant EDF, Germany's Siemens, and JP Morgan and BlackRock, as well as Uber, have all cancelled. Some of the companies will still be represented by lower-level staff. The boss of French oil company Total, Patrick Pouyanné, is still there. Total really recently signed a $9 billion contract with Saudi Aramco. Pouyanné said it was important to maintain dialogue. Now, although most American companies have chosen to stay away, there are still major economic ties between Washington and Riyadh, mostly in the trade of oil and weapons. Emerald Maxwell has more.
Saudi Arabia has promised to retaliate if sanctions are leveled against it, a threat that Donald Trump seems to have taken to heart. As the world's largest oil exporter, Riyadh could send prices soaring if it decides to cut production. But the Saudi kingdom actually has less clout in the US economy than in the past. In 2003, it was the country's largest supplier of petroleum, but it made up less than 12% of imports last year, as fracking and renewables increased the United States' domestic energy production. With its vast oil fields to protect, though, and an ongoing war in Yemen, Saudi Arabia is also the world's largest arms importer in terms of value, and more than half of its imports come from the US. Last year, Trump claimed to have signed a $110 billion defense deal with Riyadh, and US manufacturers who stand to benefit have reportedly expressed concerns about the impact of a freeze. But for the US economy as a whole, arms sales to Saudi Arabia make up just 0.1% of its worldwide exports. That doesn't mean sanctions wouldn't hurt either side, though. Saudi government money flows into many American companies, including Silicon Valley startups, as well as US universities and think tanks. Riyadh, meanwhile, is looking for more foreign investment in order to diversify its economy away from oil and address a high unemployment rate.
Lots at stake there as that gets underway, a 3-day conference in Riyadh. Jonah.
Thank you so much. Kate Moody there with the business news.